Allison, if that is the cut quote, I will not let you do that.
That Allison, make that the cut quote.
No. Welcome to Wow If True, the podcast of your wildest memes.
We're here to dissect the entire internet, something normal to want and possible to achieve. I'm science fiction author, not your attorney, and romantasy researcher, Isabel J.
And I'm Amanda Silberling, an internet culture reporter and person who reads fiction. Anyone could be famous on the internet, so why not us?
Yeah, so this is our books episode. I feel like we do books episodes every once in a while. So since we missed Public Domain Day, we're talking about Public Domain Day. But before that, we're talking about romantasy. And before that, we're talking about do men read?
Yes.
Wait, is that a yes, men read, or yes, we are talking about men reading?
Oh, that is a yes, we are talking about men reading. Do men read? You'll just have to find out as you listen to this podcast.
That's the hook to keep you listening.
Yes.
Where we investigate whether men read, without talking to a single man.
The thing about romantasy is I haven't read a ton of romantasy, but I do know that your agent wants us to write romantasy.
Okay, so romantasy. Romantasy is a hot new genre that's been hot for the last 2 or 3 years, I think, which is a portmanteau of romance and fantasy. Essentially, it is fantasy books that have aggressively romantic elements in that it is essentially a romance story that is ported over to a fantastical universe, or oh my god, he's a werewolf. Oh my god, he's a vampire. Oh my god, I'm a teenage girl. I have to choose between these two guys. It's Twilight, but we're doing it in the 2020s.
Wow.
I feel like that's the correct framing for our audience. Notable examples of romantasy include Sarah J. Maas books, which are aggressively popular. The Fourth Wing book, and also the sequels of Fourth Wing, which is another romantasy smash hit, and that's going to be relevant later. That's a secret surprise for later.
Haha, teasers.
The thing about romantasy is that it is aggressively commercial. It is very, I don't want to say female focused, but it is marketed primarily to women. Essentially, the audience here has a pretty big overlap with people who would be reading fan fiction, but people who want to read fan fiction that's straight. I mean this with love, to be clear. Romantasy is where we get the omegaverse lawsuit.
Oh no.
So,
wait, is the omegaverse lawsuit the thing we're talking about, or is that a separate thing?
That is a separate other lawsuit.
What?
Yeah, so the
How
omegaverse...
do you lead with that and that's not what we're talking about?
Wait, did you not know that we were talking about a different lawsuit than the omegaverse lawsuit?
I've never heard of the omegaverse lawsuit. I have been very intentionally not very online because...
we talked about the omegaverse lawsuit.
Did we?
Yeah, years ago.
I don't remember. What was in it?
Okay. The omegaverse lawsuit was from 2018, where they talk about this lawsuit when they're talking about this new lawsuit. But basically in 2018, there was an omegaverse lawsuit, which is that one author accused another author of saying, hey, you stole my lupine society of aggressive alphas and submissive omegas. She then sued the author and the publisher, Blushing Books, arguing... It's there's a countersuit back where it's hey, bitch, Wolf Kink Erotica is based on open source fan fiction. Long story short, competing series of lawsuits about omegaverse that eventually led to settling out of court and dismissal of the second suit.
For our listeners who I deeply envy that might not know what the omegaverse is, quick definition, what's the omegaverse?
The omegaverse is a universe where essentially there is a second series of gender added onto our existing gender based on wolves, but wolves parentheses we did it wrong, which is that there are 3 classes of people now: alphas, tops essentially, omegas, bottoms, and betas. Everyone else who is just putting in the work and wading through all of the slick that's on the ground in their galoshes. I would argue that people do this to get at seme and uke, or top bottom, or dom sub vibes, without doing that and adding a sexy new wealth element. This also comes from supernatural RPF fanfiction, which is the first instance of omegaverse that spawned the whole genre on fandom and has now bled into the real world.
And supernatural RPF is supernatural real people fic, which is people writing about the actors in Supernatural, but if they had wolf sexuality things happening.
Yeah, I'm not going to describe it further because even if this isn't a family-friendly podcast, like this is too much for me. It's 10 in the morning. I can't talk about Omegaverse. Go look it up in
Yeah,
in incognito. Go do this for yourself.
in one of the many clashes between like AI content scraping and artists on the internet, there was a movement called Not in My Name, KNOT. I'm not going to explain nodding.
Well, the alpha has not, you see. Where does that go? Well, you know, the whole. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No, and it was basically like a fanfic writing marathon with the intention of just like creating so much slop that AI like learns Omegaverse.
You know, the AI does know Omegaverse is the thing. Like, it is part of the training data. So, we're not talking about any of this, but this is all to say everything is connected to something else on the internet in a way that has repercussions beyond what you can expect.
That's where we get the inter and the internet because it's all interconnected.
This is crazy, dude.
All right, we can just end the podcast now. We did it.
I wasn't expecting. Okay, can I talk about before I get into this lawsuit? Can I talk about other romantasy? I don't want to say tropes, but other romantasy books that were published that I saw, genres of romantasy, and also like instances of weird romantasy that came up when I was researching this lawsuit.
Yes.
The first is that there is a cheese. So apparently, there's a genre of shifter romances that is extremely popular.
Like the Pokemon story.
God,
Like
and
Typhlosion.
no, just wait, just wait. One of them is a cheese shifter romance where they shift into pieces of cheese.
What?
This is all I have for you. I saw that and I was like, I can't research this anymore.
Has publishing always felt like an outgrowth of fan fiction? Like, is this new?
It's not new, but
Because, like, there are examples of, like, actual good books that are outgrowths of fan fiction. For example, the Scholomance series, which I love, literally just dreary fanfic
it's very
reskinned.
fanfic.
It's dreary fanfic, which I didn't know until you told me, and then
But like once you see it, you can.
yes. Also, I thought that that author's AO3 identity was common knowledge, and then I referenced it on the internet once, and then they were like, hey, can you like take that down? And I was like, oh my god, I'm so sorry. So I'm not going to say who it was, but I did read that person's dreary fanfic, and I was like, oh yeah, this is just the Scholomance.
I do think her situation is sort of an if you know situation where
Yeah, like I thought it was common knowledge.
I also did, but apparently not. Like she accepted awards for AO3 at Worldcon once for like the Hugo Award.
Yeah.
So I kind of just assumed she was fine with it.
Yeah, like people know that she was involved in the founding of AO3, but I guess she doesn't want everybody reading her dreary fic,
Which is really fair. I also wouldn't want anyone reading my dreary fic unless you were like looking for dreary. Like then it's fine. Okay,
so romantasy lawsuit.
Romantasy lawsuit that's currently going on. This has been going on since 2010 to some extent because in 2010, in 2010, First Lady Lynn Freeman, family law attorney, writes her novel Blue Moon Rising, and she gets an agent, Emily Sylvan Kim. Note, this is a white lady. I just want to put that out there. Kim here is a white lady.
In the notes you did write note, all caps, okay. White lady.
So, for context here, I said my name at the beginning of this. Kim is usually a Korean last name. Like 1 out of every 3 people in Korea has a last name Kim or some shit like that. It's probably like 1 out of 5. So I was sort of surprised. I was like, wow, that's a white lady. Kim and Freeman apparently worked together to expand this manuscript, and then Freeman gets like a huge amount of input from Kim over the next 3 years. And this is a story about a teenage girl who falls in love with a werewolf and learns she has magical powers. This is set in Alaska.
This already feels like reskinned Twilight.
Yeah. No, I honestly think that her version of this was not reskinned Twilight because I read the article about this and I kind of like looked into it, and it does seem like she was like working from her own vibes and mind, but it's also one of those things where there are only so many tropes. And the reason that this is kind of interesting to talk about on the pod is because I should have mentioned this earlier, but romantasy is the genre that most runs on tropes. The friction between romantasy and like fantasy and fandom and stuff like that, and the fact that there's a problem that it draws so much from fandom communities and from tropes, is that basically copyright law relies on things being different from each other. You cannot copy ideas, you can copyright forms of expression. Basically, if there's I believe it's substantial similarity, or if a judge is like, yeah, these two things are the same thing because the way that they are expressed is the same thing, that's a problem, that's a copyright violation. The issue here is that romantasy is deeply formulaic. Romantasy is like romance novels in the sense that, like, it must have the happily ever after. It is usually about a young woman discovering herself, choosing between these guys. There is some sort of magical creature. She's the magical creature. They're the magical creatures. It's like, it is fan fiction. In the same way that when you read fan fiction, you will read 15 million different hurt comfort fanfics that have the exact same plot. That's what happens with romantasy, and that's why you end up with lawsuits like these.
Interesting. Okay.
Mhm.
I also remember you talking once about how, like, if, let's say, you are writing a series of books, there are 3 books, you have written 2 books, there's fan fiction of the first 2 books. You, like, legally should not read fanfic of your books, because if anything remotely similar gets into the book, like, subconsciously, then you're fucked.
Yes, that is how that works. Because basically, this is why you should never send your favorite authors ideas for stuff they should write or stuff that they should put in their next book. Because if that author is being careful, then that idea has to be discarded. Because you could later be like, hey, I wrote this thing and I sent it to you. You did this. That was my thing. I believe that this all goes back to, I'm being pretty vague here, but this all goes back to the doctrine that arises from a fan sequel to the Rocky franchise of movies.
Amazing.
Where somebody wrote a movie, and then a future Rocky movie came out, and they were like, bro, you stole my shit. My fan created Rocky movie about things happening. I'm being vague. I haven't read this since law school.
Not my fan-created Rocky movie.
Literally, that's what it was about. Like, that's the thing about copyright law, is it's all stuff like this.
Damn, Philadelphia stays winning.
I don't know that it stays winning here. I think this is kind of like a net neutral for Philadelphia.
I have listened to, like, very formulaic and, like, romance novels while running because it's a good distraction. I like Abby Jimenez, gotta say. Emily Henry, popular for a reason. The book Funny Story, it's a funny story.
Oh my god.
I have some romance hot takes because, like, I read some romance. I wouldn't say I'm like a massive romance reader, but I just read a lot of shit.
Yeah, tell me your romance hot takes, because then we can come at this from 2 different angles, and then I'll finish explaining what's going on with the lawsuit. Because I read a lot of fantasy. I don't read a lot of romantasy. I read so much fucking fan fiction. It is disgusting the amount of fan fiction I read.
Well, romantasy is literally just fanfic.
No, yeah, exactly.
It's not. Like, I feel like people that don't know about fanfic would think that fanfic is just like people doing magic and having sex, but it is not just that. Like,
I would say there
is sex fanfic, and there's also just like, hey, I read this book and I really liked the characters and I want to know more. Let me see if there's fanfic about it. Oh, cool. Someone wrote a story about these characters that I'm interested in.
Can I describe, like, the categories of fanfic that exist?
Yes.
Okay, first, you have just porn. It's porn. It's just people writing porn. And honestly, God bless them. There's so much of it out there. So much of it is so bad. Some of it is amazing, and you can always tell when a teenager wrote it. And honestly, good for them. Like, you know, like, honestly, I think that's like honestly quite a safe place to express your sexuality if you were a 15-year-old girl, by writing about Draco and Harry fucking.
Which, insane to be like a 15-year-old girl and be like, shit, I need to figure out how, like, male sex works.
You just guess. That's what people do. They just guess.
I want to see a compilation of, like, the worst descriptions of sex, just in, like, accuracy way. Like,
you know, one of the interesting things I read once online was people talking about how writing porn is hard because there's only, like, one good word for penis. And there's one organ involved, unless you're getting, like, crazy with it. And it gets boring to read.
Yesterday, my platonic friend asked me to sext her for AI reasons.
What? Wait, sorry, we need to talk about that now.
Yeah, and it was hard to write, because I was like, what am I supposed to say? This is weird, I don't like it. So there's like a feature on like new iPhones with the AI shit where it will like summarize your texts for you.
Oh, so you needed to see what the AI would. That's
Yeah,
funny.
because my friend texted me and was like, "How are you doing?" Because I was like not feeling well a few days ago, and I was like, "Oh, I'm like doing a little better day by day." Also, did you know there's going to be a puppy in the Puppy Bowl named Saquon Barkley after the Eagles player Saquon Barkley?
That's good.
And then her phone described it as Amanda is doing better, semicolon. Puppy will be featured in Puppy Bowl named Saquon Barkley.
That's honestly not horrible.
But it was just funny. And then we were like, what about sexts? And
Mhm.
she was like, okay, you have to sext me so we can see if it works. And I was like, bro, I don't know. Like, I got really
Like, how do
nervous.
I sext?
Well, I mean, I sent like a joke sext. I think, what did I say? I want you to put your penis into my vagina as a means of performing sexual intercourse. Like, stuff like that.
Wait, what did the AI say to that?
The AI wouldn't summarize it,
That's so funny.
which, I mean, you could have guessed, but
Mhm.
like, yeah, so that was my experience writing porn, was me saying, I would like for you to put your penis into my vagina as a means of performing sexual intercourse. Allison, if that is the cut quote, I will not let you do that.
That Allison, make that the cut quote.
No.
um.
I'll
um,
put like 5 minutes of programmed ads in the front of the episode.
Okay, so there's porn. Then there's people writing 200,000 word fan fictions that are continuations or alternate universes or some shit like that. Which is like one guy locks in, writes like essentially 3 fantasy books that continue whatever story it is, or like an alternate version.
Yeah.
And when people finish those, and if they're good, those hit. Those are the best sorts of fanfic. Like that is like you have done this for nothing else than the love of the game.
There's fanfic that I've been following for like years, and then sometimes the author is updating routinely, and sometimes there's like 3 years between updates, and then you get the update after 3 years, and you're like, let's fucking go.
Dude, I got one of those like last month and I was like, holy shit, it's back.
Especially the ones that are like, because like there's this one that I've been reading for a long time where like it is genuinely really, really well written.
Mm-hmm.
Like this writer is definitely like a real writer. And
Yeah.
I'm always like, she's working on a book right now. That's why she's not updating the Ginny is a Slytherin fanfic.
And the last 2 types of fanfic are like people who write one-shots that are like absurd, but like insanely good writing. There's always like 1 or 2 extremely weird fics that are extremely good.
Yeah.
And then or like extremely sad or whatever. Like something that's like a character study. And then the last thing is Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. And these are the types of fanfic you can have.
I hate how often I think about Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality because of my involvement in tech.
Do you ever think about how it shouldn't be this relevant? That fanfiction should not be this relevant.
Eliezer Yudkowsky is like an AI doomer. And then meanwhile, he's buddies with all the like execs at OpenAI. My boy Eliezer Yudkowsky.
Yudowski is like...
He's not my boy.
I think... Whatever. Oh, wait. Okay, unrelated to what we're talking about today, and another segue that I just want to talk about on the podcast. And I'm remembering this because of the free association between Yudowski and Ayla, because Yudowski definitely wants to fuck Ayla based on his he is kind of a reply guy in her tweets, is the thing. And that made me
Imagine
remember...
a reply guy in your tweets being the guy who wrote like 600,000 words of Harry Potter fanfic solely as a means of like furthering his agenda of rationalism, which is not the worst thing in the world, but is not great either.
You have to like think about where your life has taken you. Anyway, Ayla. We've talked about Ayla on the podcast before. Ayla is sex worker, makes unhinged posts, somehow part of the tech community. Had the gangbang. Makes a post on Twitter every year with her stats for the year of different things that she's done. And I'm going to just pull this up because I do want to talk about it here because it is... I don't understand how she lives like this because she did post her stats for last year recently.
I feel like we haven't spoken like verbally in maybe like a month. Actually, no, we recorded an episode like last week. But I feel like we haven't recorded like Wow If True proper in a long time, and I think we're just going off the rails.
It's fine. It's, we're going off the rails the same way a romantasy novel goes off the rails. This is the cheese shifter of podcasts. Okay, so she posted her stats, and I'm so sorry I'm subjecting you to this, but I just want to point out some notable stats. Had sex, 41. Had a good meal.
41 people or 41 times? That's not crazy.
Had a good meal 24 times in a year.
Honestly, that's sad. You should have more good meals.
Showered. Can you guess the number that this is going to be?
Is it less than sex?
Yes.
Is it more than good meals?
No.
17?
It's 24. It was exactly the same as had a good meal.
Mm.
The face you're making right now is incredible.
I feel like you should shower after you have sex.
I feel like you should shower more than 24 times in a year. Yeah.
It's, if you have sex more times in a year, then you shower.
Yeah, just like fix your whole shit.
I'm not someone who loves showering. Like, it is kind of a chore that you have to do. It's like brushing your teeth, where it's like, I'm not like, oh boy, can't wait to brush my teeth, but if I don't do it, then I feel yucky. But like, how do you not feel yucky?
I have no answers for you. I just have statistics.
Why don't people shower?
I feel like probably, okay, do you want a serious answer or the joke answer?
Both.
The joke answer is so that you can post stats like this and go viral on X. The serious answer is probably that, like, they are either doing like a spot bath, or it feels weird to get into the shower and they have some sort of like situation about it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
It's still like, not great.
Yeah.
You should shower more.
If your reasoning for doing it is ha ha ha, then no. But if your reasoning is like actual things, then like fine.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's something.
I just wanted to share that information with you. Now you have it. I hope you enjoy it.
So this romantasy lawsuit.
Yes. So basically, every publisher rejects this novel, which, to go back 10 minutes, Lady writes a novel in 2010, fantasy novel with romance in it. Every publisher rejects it except for one, which her and her agent withdraw submission from after her and her agent part ways. This is a press called Entangled. 11 years later, in 2021, the lady goes and picks up a book called Crave by the author Tracy Wolff. By the way, Wolf is a great pen name to use for this. This is a book published by Entangled. Freeman, original author, is like, what the fuck? There's a lot of similarities. In both, main character moves from San Diego to Alaska after members of her family are killed in an accident. There's like an intimate moment under the northern lights, and in the climax, an evil vampire kidnaps her, and she accidentally frees a different vampire. You can see how all of this is just trying to capitalize on like Twilight hype.
This also did remind me of the scene in the book The Magicians where they turn into wolves and then have sex because they have wolf brains, and then they turn back into humans and they're like, oh no, we had sex as wolves.
Yeah, in retrospect, like, what was
Great book. It doesn't feel like it's trying to do a fanfic thing. It's like they're in magic.
Lev Grossman's a good writer.
Yeah.
No, but it did. I did read it and go like, so they're fucking now. So wolf sex.
I did read it and be like, well, this took a turn.
Yeah, I was like, oh, we're doing fucking.
But it wasn't like omegaverse.
No, it was like, I was like, okay, this makes sense that they're doing fucking, but I just had to like recalibrate in my brain about what sort of book it was. It was like, oh, they're doing fucking. This makes sense because they're like in college and shit.
Yeah, and they're at magic college, and they are like in Antarctica to do a crazy magic thing.
And they're wolves.
And they're wolves. And they are fucking.
And I hate books. Nobody should read anything.
I like The Magicians.
The Magicians is really good. Okay, so basically, she's like, what the fuck? A lot of similarities. Small plane, chess, like metaphors, gargoyle stuff. And it turns out that the two authors shared the same agent and had the same editor, in the sense that the editor who fielded Freeman's submission was the editor of this new book, Crave. By the way, if you go and look up Crave, for those of you at home, Crave looks exactly like Twilight's first cover, in the sense that it is a black book with like a white and red thing on the front with like a font that looks very much like Twilight's font.
Oh yeah, that literally looks like it's Twilight fanfic.
Mm-hmm. And so in 2022...
3.77 stars on Goodreads.
I think it's probably mid. In 2022, Freeman basically sues agent, author, publisher, Distributor. The distributor in this case is different than the publisher because small publishing houses will often partner with a big publishing house to for their distribution networks, or like this is a pretty common thing, and you don't know that if you're like not working in books.
Sorry, I'm not listening because the one of the characters in Crave is named Jackson Vega,
Yep.
Jaxon. And also Tracy Wolf has written over 60 novels. Anyway, I'm going to close this so I can listen to
Oh,
you.
we're going to talk about Tracy Wolf's other novels in a moment. By the way, to be clear, I'm not trying to shit on Tracy Wolf here and her 60 novels, 60 plus novels, but also, like, boy, is she writing some stuff. And it is clear that romantasy is a different thing than, like, fantasy in the sense that they are going after the romance reader who wants to churn through books, like, at a speed of one a week.
No, it's crazy how like even with like Allie Hazelwood, it's like there's always a new Allie Hazelwood book and I'm like, "Really? There was just a new one."
Yeah, because the audience that reads these books is always like, I want more content, and they will buy stuff. That's the thing about romance readers. They will actually buy the books. So this is actually an incredibly lucrative market. And that is also probably why people talk about we're going to talk about do men read later, but like that's probably also what may be skewing these statistics.
Okay.
But basically, this lawsuit is like a real thing. It's cost Freeman, original author, several hundred thousands of dollars. She had to sell her house in Alaska, and the defendants have been cost more than $1 million, and it is still going on. So was there copying? It's complicated. We talked about how copyright applies in this situation earlier. Basically, there's also a doctrine called like named after the French phrase "sans affaire." Sans affaire. I can't. I've never
Sure.
taken French. Sure. Oh, we're just going with it. Okay. Basically holding.
I don't know French.
Wow if true, podcast where nobody knows French. But basically, it holds that the standard elements of a genre, such as, like, for example, the hero and a villain having a big showdown, it's not legally protectable, although, like, the selection and arrangement of those things are protectable. By this, like, the hero's journey, not protectable. Because your guy goes on a quest and meets, like, a wise old mentor, that doesn't mean that if somebody copies you and does a quest with a wise old mentor, it's going to be copyright infringement. If it's, like, the same guy, if you are, if you put a man named Dumbledore in your books, this may be a problem. But it really is a case of like the specific expression of stuff is what is being looked at, which makes it really interesting to look at these lawsuits because it is full of a double column of these two books being compared. And it's all like shit, like it's all romantasy shit. The lawyers comparing things like in book 1, romantic leads have mind control powers. In book 2, romantic leads have mind control powers. In book 1, heroine obsesses over a romantic lead. In book 2, heroine obsesses over a romantic lead. It's all stuff like that. And then they start pulling out like specific segments. And like, for example, on point 16 on page 24 of this complaint, she notices pain in his eyes. In the first book, his eyes, revealed within their depths, was an anguish so raw I knew it rivaled my own. In the second book, his eyes, an agony so deep, I can feel it calling to my own pain. And I would just love to have this job.
This reminds me of like teen writing shit where I think I've mentioned on the podcast before, because I am who I am, I was involved in like online high school competitive writing circuits. It has traumatized me to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And when you put a bunch of pressure on like 16-year-olds to write like poetry good enough that it's going to win crazy awards that help them get into college, they plagiarize things.
Mm-hmm.
And there were like huge plagiarism scandals like when I was in that sphere where people would take poems and do the same thing where it's like side by side like
Mm-hmm.
looking at the poems. But this time it's romantasy authors with money involved and lawyers, and at the time it was like 16-year-old poets in Connecticut.
No, but here's the thing. So, second author, Wolf, never had direct access to the original draft, but who did have access was the agent and the publisher. And here's the other thing. So this is where it gets into technical book, how books get made stuff, which I thought would actually be kind of interesting to talk about on a podcast. So the publisher, under the imprint Red Tower, the publisher is Entangled, and then this is published under the imprint Red Tower. That is also the imprint that did like Fourth Wing and stuff, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about this imprint is that it is so a traditional publisher. What happens is basically you submit them a book through your agent. They're like, we like this book, we dislike this book. They don't dictate any of the terms of what is this book about, et cetera, et cetera. So, for example, if a publisher is trying to acquire romantasy stuff, to some extent, they have to rely on the fact that people are going to send them romantasy stuff. A book packager is different. And to be clear, I'm not disparaging book packagers in any way, but what happens with a book packager is that a book packager it's top down.
Okay.
Editor or whoever is at the book packager is like, hey, we need a book about XYZ. Who can we get to write this? And the reason that they do this is because this way they can chase trends, not trace trends. And that's how once a trend starts getting traction, you will start to see a lot of really quickly, kind of honestly, a lot of them kind of shitty, copies of this trend popping up in bookstores very quickly after. It's a combination of editors and traditional publishing houses being like, oh, now this is stuff that we're looking for. It's in the slush pile, or not in the slush pile, but like, oh yeah, this is being sent to us. But it's also book packagers being like, hey, we can get people to write this. The thing about that is that it is usually a worse situation for the author, but it is also guaranteed money in the sense that a lot of the times a book packager keeps the rights to the IP as opposed to you having the rights to IP. It really depends. Red Tower is an imprint that publishes like is kind of halfway between a book packager and a traditional publisher in how they work, in the sense that the editor is way more in the weeds. So what happened with Crave is that the editor, the agent, and the author were all in the manuscript because it is having to be written so fast because of the pub date that everyone is putting input. Nobody remembers who wrote what. And that is like just in the article where they talk about this. The people involved have admitted this. So it is entirely possible that the editor and the agent just simply shunted some ideas over. But it also might be things that the original authors thought were really specific, for example, Alaska, private plane, are actually generic tropes of the genre, and the genre is just batshit. Because apparently private plane is like, or a pilot is like a crazy common trope because bitches love a man in uniform, and this is a nice way to do a man in uniform where it has no bearing on the plot, and now he is like a method of transport that's kind of sexy.
Do you know how much money people usually are paid? Like if someone says, no.
I have no idea. It's not something I've ever been approached for. And I think it's enough to convince people. What I would imagine is that it's more similar to a ghostwriting contract than anything else. But again, I don't know a ton about this. I know that it's guaranteed money and enough of it to make it worth it.
Yeah. A writing job is a writing job, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I guess, I mean, there's a lot of factors that could make it good or bad, like many things.
Yeah, it's like, it is what it is. I also wanted to point out that the author who is accused of copying wrote so many fucking books. It's like, I just want to talk about this because it truly is like, she has like a new to my books section, and it's like, if you're looking for sexy dragons, my Dragon's Heat trilogy is a great place to start.
Oh no.
If you're looking for dark and sexy rock stars with a side of humor, check out my best-selling Shake and Dirty series. If you're looking for some quick erotic reads, check out my Art of Pleasure novellas. But then, like, anyway, I just wanted to point out the ones I thought were funny. Again, no shade to her. I actually think it's a skill to be able to write this quickly, and I have a lot more admiration for authors who can just pump shit out now that I have to be pumping shit out and I'm just not doing it. But, sometimes it leads to situations like this. The lawsuit is ongoing. We shall see what happens. This might actually have actual tangible effects later on because how the ruling gets done here might affect how romantasy authors in the future write their books or how publishers are or are not as cautious.
Yeah, I feel like especially when you're having people write these books so quickly, you're kind of bound to have copies. Like it just feels like there's not enough potential things that could be happening in this genre. Like you can write like 500 werewolf romances that are unique, but you can't write like 600 werewolf romances that are unique. Maybe.
And I just wanted to read, to close out the section, which has gone on way longer than I thought it would. I just want to read the description of another book that Entangled Publishing puts out called the Virgin Hunt Games.
Oh no.
It is Earth, year 2324. Melody Simmons desperately needs to fill her bank accounts with credits that could help her family climb out of near poverty. And in the Virgin Hunt Games, that means enticing as many hunters as possible to bed her. The downside: billions of viewers from all parts of the galaxy will be watching her fall from virtue with avid interest.
That feels like non-consensual.
But wait, Alien, Damon Banscott, he's an alien, despises everything about the Virgin Hunt Games, except the fact he can now legally destroy his enemy in the games. He's in for this for one reason: revenge. Then Damon sees one of the beautiful hunted, and for a moment his heart stops beating. He'll fight to the death before allowing another hunter to touch and deflower Melody. But while the hunters get more credits by pleasing their captive mate sexually, the hunted women receive more by finding their pleasure with any of the hunters who aren't their assigned mate. Let the games begin. There are 4 books in this series.
You didn't share the beginning of the description, which is Earth, year 2030.
I did say that.
Oh, really? I didn't hear that. I was maybe just scarred. Also, the cover is like buff man wearing leather.
Yes. Also, I like that one of the reviews was, I was pleasantly surprised there was a real plot with multi-layered characters instead of a series of meaningless sex scenes.
I'm like reading her bio, and yeah. All right, well, books really do be out here existing.
So let's talk about the male literacy crisis.
Hello, it is Amanda, and welcome to the mid-roll. I have a headache. I hope you don't have a headache. But most of all, I hope that our newest patron, Christina, does not have a headache. If you also want preferential treatment for my desire for you to not have a headache, you can join us at patreon.com/wowiftrue. We have a monthly bonus podcast where we talk about books and or reality TV and or video games. Mostly books, but you never know what you're going to get. And we have a patron-only Discord that is very fun and normal and, let's face it, unhinged. Speaking of creating the content, Attach Your Resume is a brand new show from Multitude that interviews online creators about how their jobs work and how they got there. Amanda McLaughlin and Eric Silver, the creators of Multitude, talk to creators about their personal stories behind seismic events in digital media and talk about the concrete steps that we can take to build a sustainable media landscape. Isabel and I were on the New Year's episode where we were given the very mammoth task of talking about something that makes us optimistic about the digital media landscape in the new year, which I gotta say, so hard to think of something. But we did think of things, and a lot of other digital creators thought of things, so it's not all doom and gloom. And something I really like about Attach Your Resume is that even though most people in media are feeling pretty overwhelmed and jaded right now, there are people that have figured out how to make sustainable living doing it on their own and saying fuck you to the corporations that have fucked them over in the past. Fuck you, corporations that have fucked people over in the past. They have interviews with people like Taylor Lorenz, internet culture reporter, Jack Conte, CEO of Patreon. The most recent episode was an interview with the streamer Grand Pooh Bear, who I don't know who that is. I'm not really up in the streaming stuff. But even though I was like, who is Grand Pooh Bear? Is that a person? It was still really interesting to hear about, like, how do you be a streamer? And when you move into a neighborhood and your neighbors are like, oh, there's a gamer moving in, like, how do you deal with that? That did happen. Apparently, this guy, like, moved into his house, and then the neighbors were like, oh, you're the gamer. And that's just the worst thing that can possibly happen to somebody. Yeah, genuinely, Attach Your Resume is a great show. It's helpful for me as somebody who has some years in the bank in digital media. If I were just starting out, it would also be super helpful. And honestly, like, if you just think it's interesting when Isabel and I talk about our weird job situations, or like if you're interested in how do you make a career being like the guy with the eel pit, they don't interview that guy, but imagine if they did, then attach your resume, good show. And speaking of good shows, you still got some WoW True ahead of you, so strap in, lads. Wait, can I read you a description of a book?
Mm-hmm.
This is from HarperCollins, I might add.
Mm-hmm.
27-year-old Emily doesn't have a lot going well in her life right now. She dreams of a creative career, but works as a receptionist in an auto shop. She longs for big city life, but lives in a small town on Prince Edward Island. She craves a close group of friends, but is stuck with irritating, car-obsessed coworkers. What Emily does have is a 300-day streak on the New York Times Wordle. But one day, with
Oh my
only one
God.
guess left and no clue what the answer is, she's forced to turn to one of her irritating car-obsessed coworkers, John, for help. And in doing so, realizes that he might not be so irritating after all. As they make their way word by word toward a 365-day streak, Emily is drawn into a surprising romance that will take her outside of her comfort zone and challenge everything she thought she knew about happiness, success, and love.
Okay, so I have a question for you. Have you read this?
No, I got the ALC, Advanced Listening Copy, from Libro FM, because at the beginning of every month they give us audiobooks. Use code WOW at checkout for I think you get like 2-for-1 books for a book. I don't know. It's been a while. But we do have a code technically. It's WOW. But yeah, I saw this book and I was like, "Oh my god. This is a book." But the thing that bothers me about this is like, this is a debut novel.
Why does it bother you that this is a debut novel?
Because I feel like it's different when you're someone who's churning out like a book a month, writing like 60 books, and like it's different because you are intentionally sort of doing the formulaic thing. But this is like someone got a book deal to write Wordle book.
Yeah, but like that happens.
Yeah. I don't know. I might
I don't
read
know,
it
man.
just to see how bad it is.
Well, I'm
Like,
curious as to like, is Wordle like a prominent? Okay, so here's my
Yeah.
thoughts on this. First of all, the shelf life of this book is so low. Like the amount of time before Wordle becomes irrelevant is it's not even quite that relevant right now.
Yeah.
Second, it's like, is Wordle like a prominent thing through it, or is it just kind of at the beginning?
Yeah, that's the thing is like, this could just be a book about like girl who works at an auto shop and dreams of big city life and hates her small town and then realizes through falling in love with this car guy that maybe things aren't as bad. Like, that's a very typical romance novel plot.
Mm-hmm.
But the Wordle involvement is like, did she write this manuscript and then her agent was like, you know what we need to do to make this great? Wordle.
I mean, that could have happened, honestly. Or
I want to read it. We should read it for our Patreon only book.
We're gonna fucking read the Wordle book. Fine, okay, let's read the Wordle book.
Well, I have the audio.
Alright, okay, so now that we've spent an hour, it's not an hour, talking about romance novels. So do men read?
So this has been a discourse that there's been like a bunch of articles about where people are like, men don't read fiction. And then the statistics seem to indicate that that is not true.
Yeah, so the reason that this is back,
But anecdotally, men don't read fiction.
how many men do you know? How much do you talk about fiction with them?
I feel like this is going off of like my brother, my dad, and a friend.
Okay, that's like 3 men.
I know, and this is why there's no media literacy, because people think that 3 people doing something is a trend.
I understand. Well, I mean,
But
something Ken's trend joke. Anyway.
But I don't think that men read fiction, and it bothers me when people only read nonfiction because there is value in storytelling as a way of learning stuff as well.
Okay, so 2 things. First of all, the reason that we're talking about this again is that it has, like clockwork, arisen in a discourse because someone wrote a New York Times opinion piece. David J. Morris, who is an assistant professor of English at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and he is basically like, yeah, it's a problem that there are not enough dudes in like literary spaces, and it's not a good thing that men are not reading, especially with literary fiction, because it's not because it's bad that it's mostly women who are doing this. It's bad if dudes aren't reading, which is a very fair point, but it ignited like discourse because people love to talk about how men don't read, and there's specifically like an 80% stat that people love to quote about how, so basically the quote that people always use is that men only really account for like 20% of the fiction market, and that basically 80% of it is women. And then somebody at Vox did a deep dive article on this. Constance Grady did this about how she can't find the quote, the source for this quote, and that everyone she asks about this quote source cannot find the study that it refers to. So maybe men read.
Maybe men read.
Maybe men read.
I guess the reason why my anecdata of 3 people rings true to me is because I think it sort of reflects this like commodification of reading that I think we are seeing happen, like both in terms of like with romantasy, it's like people are out here on Goodreads like I'm going to read 200 books this year, and it's like, bro. Which I mean,
but
I
see,
think
that's
reading...
the thing. That's the thing that the romance industry is targeting. That guy. Anyway, go on.
But then with men, it's like they read books. By they, I mean like the 3 men I'm thinking of in particular. They read books about like trying to better themselves, but these are often kind of hackish books anyway, where it's like someone can say things like in one of the books I'm thinking about, it's like, do you know what fear means? Fear actually stands for false events appearing real.
Deep sigh.
And I get it. Like, it does make sense of like, if you're putting off doing something because you're afraid of it, just kind of do it. I feel like this rings true for like doing the dishes, where the longer you leave dishes sitting without doing them, the worse doing them is going to be. So just do it.
This is so real.
But sometimes you're afraid of things because they are scary. Mm-hmm. Like when I was hiking in a cave this summer and have never come closer to death.
Was Jesus even?
Yeah, Jesus was there.
Yeah, Jesus
literally.
was there.
We talked about this.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this sounds like self-help books, but for men.
Yeah, but I feel like there is a very like male energy, for lack of a better word, to like reading things with the explicit purpose of trying to improve yourself. Whereas like,
wait, no, okay, I'm gonna push back on this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say that this is actually an American thing and not just a gender thing, because I think there's a lot of women who will read self-help books or books about like how to fix yourself emotionally, but will not read like a novel.
Yeah, I think this is also sort of symptomatic of like one of my favorite TikTok rabbit holes is like 10 kitchen gadgets I bought on Amazon that changed my life. Because doing the actual work of changing your life for the better is really, really hard. Mm-hmm. But buying a thing is really, really easy.
God, we fucking love good gadgets in America.
And the thing is, sometimes those kitchen gadgets do change your life.
Yeah, okay, every day I think about how I need to probably buy like a mandolin, and this would change my life.
Yeah.
This happens every time I'm chopping something.
To be fair, I have a mandolin that I don't use as much as I thought I would, but also you can get one for like $20.
I just keep forgetting to buy it. Like, I'll go to the store and not buy it.
Yeah.
And then I go home and I'm like, oh, fuck.
I have a Ninja chopper, like a little mini chopper for $20, and it's pretty good. And then in a TikTok video, Bryce Harper, star player of the Philadelphia Phillies, was using that chopper, and I was like, damn, he just like me for real. He also mentioned that his family drinks raw milk in one of those videos, which was a whole thing in Philadelphia sports news, but I'm already going to talk about Philadelphia sports in a little bit, so we don't need to go in on Bryce Harper.
Yeah, like, I don't know. Like, I think that men's literacy, like, men's literary habits thing is a real thing, but probably not to the extent that people think it is. I think my data is skewed by the fact that the 2 genres of man that I hang around are, like, guys who read like a lot of wizard fiction and guys who are in tech. And guys who are in tech will not read a book.
Yeah.
Respectfully.
Well, we are in a wizard fiction group chat where everybody's name is Wizard Isabel,
Yeah.
Wizard Amanda, Wizard Roshan.
And like, so the thing is that like I feel like I'm in a community where people are reading books and a lot of them are dudes. And then I run into the other camp of guys who will mansplain books to you sometimes. And I'm like, beans, I'm getting mansplained a book.
I think there's also a trend of like summaries of books becoming a big thing.
Yeah, wait, okay, like honestly, maybe like God, this is a different episode, but people reading the AI summary of a book as opposed to reading the book, our nation is in shambles. Our youth is in shambles.
And like reading books, like you can read things because you want to read them. And you can also read things because of like you're trying to learn something. Like, I don't know. I've been reading a lot of nonfiction lately because I want to be better at arguing with my family about events in the Middle East.
That's so specific. I was gonna say you should read that book I read about COD, but I don't think that would help you in this scenario. Like, I actually think that would be like a net negative to that.
But something I've
argument.
also realized in those books is that when we're talking about like authors that come from these specific cultures that are talking about events that have happened within the last like 50 years, sometimes will include like, and this is this memory that my grandfather experienced. And I think that's really valid data. And I've noticed there's sort of like sometimes people think that that delegitimizes historical writing. But I think that historical writing is very important because that's like the records that we have of very recent historical events that are like very specific and small. Like, I don't know, like that anecdata is good anecdata because it's not drawing conclusions about a whole thing. It's just saying this is what my family did. So I don't know. I mean, it is interesting sort of seeing the difference in how historical books are written when they're talking about recent events versus like far out events.
Right. I mean, that's just going to happen based on the way that the linear passage of time works.
Crazy.
Like, it's crazy how that one works. Yeah, I don't know. I think in general, everybody should read more. And the thing is that, like, I think reading in the pop culture gets conflated both with frivolous shit, but also with, like, intellectual bullshit that has no resemblance to reality. But, like, honestly, I think reading is the best technology if you want to experience, if you want to have the emotions that someone else had, or like see things from a new perspective, in a way that I think other forms of technology don't necessarily always give you.
Yeah.
Everyone should go read a book.
Reading books doesn't make my brain feel bad. Except sometimes when it does, when I'm reading books about conflicts in the Middle East.
Yeah, but that's a choice you're making.
Yeah. So, speaking of men reading books, let me tell you about my son, AJ Brown.
Okay.
Arthur Juan Brown. I found out that was what AJ stands for, and I'm like, damn, that's like not what you'd expect.
It's a good name.
I feel like usually like PJs or AJs are like something junior.
Yeah. I thought you were gonna say, let me tell you about a man reading a book. Which I guess is also what's gonna happen here.
Yes, let me tell you about a man reading a book.
That's crazy.
Arthur Juan quotes, AJ Brown is a wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles, a football team. And the Eagles had a playoff game on Sunday. I watched it, unrelated to the book thing, but it was cool as hell. They had like, instead of someone singing the national anthem, they had someone playing it on the saxophone. And it went hard. And then they released a literal eagle into the sky.
Like, that's actually incredible. They should do that at every sports game.
Yeah, like, it was like a trained eagle that like flew to like its keeper or whatever. Like, it wasn't like we're just releasing an eagle into the wild.
Imagine
like, it was
being the eagle guy. Imagine that being your job.
Yeah. AJ Brown was having maybe like a little bit of a frustrating game. Like, he just wasn't really getting as much action as maybe he normally would, and people were theorizing maybe he's pissed off that he's only gotten like one ball thrown to him or something. And then they panned to showing him sitting on the sidelines because wide receivers are on offense, so while the defensive line is on, like the offensive players aren't there. So he's sitting on the sidelines and he's reading a book.
Crazy.
And people are like, this man is reading a book? Which
People in Philadelphia are fucking insane about the Eagles, let alone an Eagles playoff game taking place in Philadelphia at Lincoln Financial Field, which has a capacity sold out of 67,594 people. That's a lot of fucking people. Imagine you are in a stadium of 67,594 people screaming because of something that you are deeply involved in, and you pull out a book.
So that book goes viral,
Yes,
doesn't it?
This book is called Inner Excellence. Train Your Mind for Extraordinary Performance and Live the Best Possible Life by Jim Murphy.
This feels like a sort of book a football player
and it
would
was
read.
self-published.
Like, you need that inner excellence.
It was self-published in 2020. And I just think that's interesting because, like, this wasn't a book with institutional backing. Like, this was a guy.
But this also sounds like a guy book.
Yeah.
Like in the way that you've been describing earlier.
Yeah,
this is like how do I make myself
like
better?
Alchemist.
Fuck.
The Alchemist is the only fiction that men read. And Ready Player One, when Mark Zuckerberg made everybody at Meta read Ready Player One.
Men will also read Dune and then ask me about why I haven't read Dune.
Huh.
They love to do that to me.
But so then the Eagles win. Everyone's happy. In the locker room after the game, of course, the reporters are like, "Hello, AJ Brown. You were reading a book on the sidelines while 67,000 people were screaming at you. What are you doing?" And
What's
he
up
said,
with that?
"It gives me a sense of peace. That's a book that I bring every single game. My teammates call it a recipe. It's the first time I heard you got me on camera, but it's not the first game." Apparently he's been bringing this book to every game and just reading it during the game.
Powerful.
And so now Inner Excellence is the #1 book on Amazon, which is especially impressive considering that what's #2 is a book called Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros, which is the next book in the very popular Fourth Wing romantasy series.
And who's Fourth Wing's publisher? That's right, it's Entangled. It's all coming together.
So AJ Brown reading a book during a football game is really taken off.
How do we get a football player to read my book during a game? In 2 years. Year and a half.
Are there any Korean football players that would maybe be like, we could be like, "Hey, do you want to read a book about Korean American diaspora?"
I feel like we could get a white
No,
guy.
yeah, I mean, anyone,
fine. Or a
like,
black guy.
Anyone can read your book, but I feel like we could really be like, "Hello, Korean football player. May I present you?"
I don't think Asians are allowed to play football. I think it's just, racism has its foothold in this, and also so do hedge
Honestly,
injuries.
probably better for Koreans overall to not be playing football.
Honestly, nobody should be playing football. Like, from a concussion
I genuinely
standpoint.
believe no one should be playing football and that the NFL is probably bad for society, and yet I have an uncle that thinks the NFL is too woke.
On that note, let's bring back gladiatorial fights. But also, they fuck during them.
Really?
Scene. No, well, I mean, they didn't.
Okay.
I was making a joke about romantasy novels. I hope
Cool.
this helps.
Thanks.